Hi, Debbie here, and today I'd like to take you along with me as I continue my mixed media experiments. If you hang in until the end of this video, I have details of a blog hop and giveaway to share. I love the Distress line from Tim Holtz, which includes acrylic paint, and I recently popped a few more colours of acrylic paint into my basket to play with too. I have no idea how to use acrylic paint, but the best way to find out more about a new medium is to play an experiment. I'm pairing Speckled Egg Distress Paint with Elephant and Sand from Dina Wakley. I also pulled out some white gesso for mixing and crackle texture paste and embossing glaze for interesting texture. One of my favourite mixing palettes is a simple white plate. You get a lovely large area to mix in and clean up is easy too. I squeezed a small dollop of each colour onto the plate along with a bigger splodge of white gesso. In my recent shopping haul, I also added Dina Wakley media brushes and tools. I don't want to ruin my nice watercolour brushes with acrylic paint, and also you want a firmer brush to be able to move the paint around. A soft watercolour brush would not only get ruined, it just isn't the best tool for the job either. I used the number 6 round brush for mixing a tiny bit of water with the paint to get it moving, and I also mixed Speckled Egg and the white gesso to give me a range of pale blue hues. Again, I don't know what I'm doing and I need to pick up some mixed media surface, but for now I used a piece of Fabriano watercolour card as I thought it was thick and strong enough to handle me moving the paint around. I did that with a 3/4 inch flat brush and I just went for it. I started with a little water on the surface and then brought in quick broad strokes of the colours I'd mixed on my palette. In comparison to my watercolouring, this background was super speedy to make. I mainly stuck to the Speckled Egg mixes along with the white gesso, but I did bring in areas of other colours. In particular, I like the warmth that a little sand brought to the table. I tried not to smooth out the surface too much, but to leave brush marks visible. Acrylic paint is thicker and so you can get more texture in the surface. Once I was happy, I then used a heat tool to gently dry off the surface. I then used a stencil, white gesso and the 3/4 inch flat brush and lightly swiped the gesso partially over the stencil design. This resulted in a loose dot pattern over the light blue background. Once acrylic paint is dry, it doesn't reactivate like watercolour can, and so you can add layer over layer and each layer is separate from the ones below. I dried off the dot layer and then decided to add more texture with the Tim Holtz Crackle Texture Paste. This is a slick mousse-like medium that cracks as it dries to give a lovely texture. I used a palette knife to smear paste from the top of the blue panel downwards, and then I went in with my fingers to give a more organic loose texture. I sprinkled a little Speckled Egg embossing glaze on top and tapped the board from below to spread the powder around a little. Now I'm not sure if you should leave the crackle paste to dry naturally to get the best texture, but I was impatient and went straight in with the heat tool, melting the embossing glaze and also bringing out the texture of the crackle paste. Before I removed the panel from the board, I splattered with Speckled Egg Distress Paint, white gouache and also Perfect Pearls. I still can't seem to let go of splatter and to be honest, I don't want to. It adds another layer of interest. So far there's the background paint layer, the white dots layer, the crackle paste and embossing glaze layer, and now the splatter layer, and I'm not finished yet. I took the Friendship Text background stamp and lightly inked it with pumice stone distress ink before rolling the stamp over the background from the edges. This gives a lovely, subtle, slightly broken text layer. Finally, I set the background to one side for a bit. For the focal point, I wanted to bring in extra interest and detail while still keeping to the same monochrome colour palette. I stamped the Thoughtful Flower wood stamp on vellum that I treated with anti-static powder, and I used clear embossing ink and then white heat embossed. It's been a while since I used a wooden stamp and it felt quite retro, but one thing I hadn't forgotten was the beautiful delicate lines you get with red rubber. Even when I white heat emboss the crocus, which white heat embossing does have a tendency to thicken lines, and you have to be careful not to lose definition. but even with the embossing, the delicate lines of the crocus still shine. I trimmed out with my new favourite scissors and set aside while I worked on the sentiment. I actually stamped and cut out 3 crocus flowers, but only ended up using 2. For the sentiment, I used the XL Greetings 2 set. For this card, I wanted to be able to see the background I'd created, and so the elements I used needed to pack a punch while being space efficient, and the sentiments in this set certainly do that. The matching dies cut around the sentiments so you have an impactful greeting, but beautifully trimmed out. So at this point I had vellum flowers and a sentiment piece, and I didn't want them to be floating around in midair on the card front. And so to create a ground, I spritzed a piece of muslin from the Tim Holtz Halloween trimming set with speckled egg distress stain and lots of water. In real life, there are areas of the muslin which have a faint blue tinge, but you can't really see it in the photographs. However, I did find that wetting the muslin and then drying it off gave it a lovely natural shape when scrunched onto the background. I used Ranger Multimedia Matte to keep it in place and then wrapped it around the back and secured it with 3M micropore tape. I tucked the base of 2 of the vellum flowers into the gluey muslin, and this helps to keep them in place too. I often get asked about attaching vellum, and the best way is to be sneaky about it. The stems are glued in place in the muslin, and then one of the flowers gets attached further by the sentiment piece on which I use foam squares. Then once I'd added a bunch of sequins and pearls, there are places where you can hide a small piece of foam tape. All in all, the vellum looks like it's floating, but is in fact firmly attached. So there you have it, one of my mixed media experiments, keeping to a cool pastel blue monochrome colour scheme with lots of textural layers to keep the eye moving around the card and the mind interested. I'll leave links below where you can find the products that I've used today, many of which are brand new from the latest Samsa Stamp release. Also, I'll leave a link to the blog post where you'll find more details not only of this card, but also details of a blog hop and giveaway that's going on too. Thanks for joining me. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial, and if you have, then please subscribe to this channel. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.